A boot crunched on frozen gravel. A second boot answered. Then a third followed. 3 pairs of black skirts swept up to a porch where an old man sat cleaning a rifle by lamplight. He did not stand. He did not speak. He listened to the wind drag itself across the yard and waited for the knock he knew was coming. When it came, it was soft, almost polite. 3 knuckles. Then 3 more. He set the rifle down across his lap and asked the door who was there. A woman answered through the wood. She said his name like she owned it. Caleb Dune. You belong to us now. The old cowboy had bought this ranch 6 hours earlier. He had ridden 11 days to reach it. He had never seen these women in his life. So how did they know him? Stay with me on this one. Caleb Dune had not slept indoors in 11 days. He had ridden up from the Texas line with a leather satchel of banknotes pressed against his ribs and a single change of shirt rolled behind the saddle. He was 61 years old. He had broken 3 fingers, 2 ribs, and 1 heart over the course of a working life, and he wanted none of it anymore. He wanted a fence, a stove, and a roof. He wanted to die slow, and he wanted to die on land that belonged to him. The ranch sat at the bend of a shallow creek, 12 miles north of a town called Sage Hollow. The town had 4 buildings. The land agent worked out of the back of a feed store. When Caleb laid his banknotes on the counter, the agent counted them twice. Then he handed Caleb a deed in a clean envelope and said, "Good luck out there." He said it the way a man says it when he means something else. Caleb had asked. He had asked who owned the place before him. The agent had said Silas Marwick. Caleb had asked where Silas was now. The agent had said dead. Pneumonia 2 winters back. The widow had signed over the deed to settle his accounts. The agent had not said which widow. Caleb had not thought to ask. He rode out at dawn. The land opened slow and brown and went on. He passed antelope in clusters of 4. He passed a single buzzard riding a slow circle over something he could not see. By noon the country had no fences. By dusk it had no roads. He kept his hat low and his pace even. The horse was a 16-year-old gelding he had named Pardon, because Pardon was the last thing the horse had been called when Caleb took him out of a county pound in Abilene 6 summers back. Pardon had carried him through 3 winters and 1 bad knee. Pardon would carry him to the porch and no further. When Caleb saw the ranch house, he reined up and just looked. It was small. It was square. It had a stone chimney leaning 2 degrees off true and a tin roof that needed paint. There was a well at the side and a barn that had once been red and was now mostly the color of old blood. The fence around the house had collapsed in 2 places. Coyote Scat lay in front of the door. He breathed out long and slow. He thought this will do. He thought this is enough. He stepped down from Pardon. He led the horse to the well and drew up a bucket. The water was cold and clean. He drank from his hand and then offered the rest to the horse. He took the saddle off and laid it across the porch railing. He carried his satchel inside. The house was empty. Someone had swept it. That bothered him for a half-second, and then it did not. He found a kerosene lamp on the table with oil still in the base. He lit it. He set his rifle across his knees and sat in the only chair. He counted the boards in the ceiling. There were 27. He thought 27 boards is fine. 27 boards is plenty for an old man. He had eaten beans cold from a tin for 11 days. He boiled water on the stove and made coffee. The smell of coffee in a closed room had not happened to Caleb Dune in a long time. He sat with the cup in both hands and let it warm his fingers. He smiled. Believe me when I tell you, he smiled. That was when he heard the first boot crunch on the frozen gravel outside. He did not jump. A man who has worked cattle for 41 years does not jump at footsteps. He set the cup down. He picked up the rifle. He walked to the window and lifted 1 slat of the burlap curtain. 3 figures stood at the edge of the yard. They were not moving forward. They were waiting for him to look. When he looked, they began to walk. Slow, together, black skirts, black veils, 3 sets of hands folded in front of them like at a funeral. He let the curtain fall. He sat back down at the table. He picked up his coffee. The cup was warm. The cup was good. He drank from it and waited. This is the part of the story where Caleb did not know yet that the deed in his envelope had been forged the same week he bought it. He did not know that the 3 widows had been watching the road for 2 months. He did not know that Silas Marwick had been buried under his own barn floor. He drank his coffee. He waited for the knock. The knock came soft and patient. 3 knuckles. Then 3 more. Caleb did not stand right away. He set the coffee down. He laid the rifle across his lap. He cleared his throat and spoke through the wood. Door is open. Step in slow. Hands where I can see them. The latch lifted. The door swung in. The first woman crossed the threshold and stopped 2 feet inside. She was tall. Her veil hung to her collarbone. She lifted it with one hand and folded it back over her hat. Her face was about 30. Hair the color of wet straw. Eyes the color of nothing in particular. She smiled at him as if they had met before and were continuing an old, gentle conversation. The second woman came in behind her. Shorter, whiter, older, maybe 50. She did not lift her veil. She nodded toward Caleb and stood to the left of the first. The third woman came in last and closed the door behind her without turning around. She was the youngest, 20, maybe 22. Her veil came up and her face was sharp and pretty and tired. She did not look at Caleb. She looked at the deed envelope sitting on the table next to his coffee. Caleb said, "Good evening, ladies." The tall one said, "Good evening, Caleb." He had not given his name. He had not told the land agent his middle name, and the deed used only his first and last. He felt the small hairs lift on the back of his neck. He kept the rifle still on his lap. The tall one said, "May we sit?" Caleb said, "You may stand and tell me what you want." The tall one nodded as if that was fair. She took a folded paper from a velvet bag at her wrist and laid it open on the table. She turned it so Caleb could read it. The paper was a marriage certificate from the state of Missouri, dated 1873. The groom's name on the line was Silas Marwick. The bride's name was the tall woman's. She tapped the paper once with one gloved finger. The whiter, older woman lifted her veil now. She drew her own paper from her own bag and laid it next to the first. Same groom. Different state. Different year, 1869. Kansas. The youngest woman did not move from the door. She did not need to. She said over her shoulder, "Mine is from Colorado, 1876. I have it here." Caleb looked at the 3 papers. He looked at the 3 women. He laid one hand flat on the table next to the rifle, palm down. He said, "Ladies, the man who married you all is dead. 2 winters back. The land agent told me himself." The tall one smiled wider. She said, "The man we married was buried under his own barn floor 7 months ago. The land agent in Sage Hollow has been paid $200 not to know that. The deed in your envelope was signed by him after he was already dead. There is no clean way to say this to you, so I will say it plain. The contract that binds the deed binds you too. You bought our husband's debts when you bought our husband's land. You belong to us now." Caleb said no. The tall one said yes. He stood up. He held the rifle at low ready, not pointed at them, not pointed away. He said, "Ladies, I do not know your husband. I never met him. The deed I have is signed and sealed by the registrar in this county. The marriages you carry are nothing to me. I am asking you to leave my house tonight, and we can talk this through in town in the morning, with the marshal present like Christian people." The youngest woman said, "The marshal is 40 miles south and the snow is coming in." The whiter one said, "You do not have a horse fast enough." The tall one said, "We have a wagon outside." We have brought you blankets. We have brought you food. We do not want to harm you, Caleb Dune. We want to take you home. That is all. You will work the ranch. We will keep the house. You will be cared for in your old age. This is a Christian arrangement. The papers will be filed in the morning. Caleb said nothing for a moment. He felt his pulse in his throat. He felt his pulse in his teeth. He said, "Leave." The tall one looked sad. She actually looked sad. She said, "We will be back at sunrise." Think on it tonight. Think on the fact that there is no other deed in this county with your name on it. Think on the fact that we have a marshal letter that says you have been impersonating the late Silas Marwick. Think on the fact that we are reasonable women. She folded her veil down. The other two folded their veils down. They walked out the door in the order they came in. The youngest closed it behind her, gentle as a nurse. Caleb stood in the kitchen with the rifle in his hand and listened to a wagon pull away into the dark. He did not move for a long time. Then he sat. Then he reached for his coffee. The cup was still warm. He drank from it. He set it down. He looked at the 3 papers still spread on the table. He folded them slowly, one by one, and stacked them under his hat. He picked up his rifle and broke it open and counted the rounds. He had 11. He had a box of 20 more in his satchel. He stood up. He walked to the window. He lifted the burlap. The yard was empty. The moon was a thin sliver. Somewhere a coyote called, and somewhere else another coyote answered. He let the curtain fall. He sat back down. He poured himself another cup of coffee from the kettle. He sipped it slow. The house was quiet. The house was warm. The house was his. He had a deed. He had a rifle. He had a stove. The widows were gone. He could deal with this in the morning, like Christian people. A window pane shattered above his head. The bullet did not hit him. It hit the kerosene lamp. The lamp burst into a slow blue puddle of flame across the table, and the 3 marriage certificates curled brown at their edges. Caleb was already on the floor. He rolled twice and came up behind the iron stove with the rifle braced against his shoulder. He did not fire. He listened. A second shot came through the same window. It hit the wall behind where he had been sitting. He counted his breath. He waited. The fire on the table grew. He could feel the heat on the side of his face. Outside, a voice called his name. Not the tall woman voice. A man voice. Old. Dry. Caleb Dune, the voice called. You can come out now or burn in there. Your choice. The widow said to be gentle. The widows are not paying me. Caleb crawled to the table on his belly. He scooped the 3 papers and his coffee mug and his hat off the surface in one motion and dropped back behind the stove. He set the papers under his shirt against his belly. He stamped the fire out with the flat of his rifle butt and his bare hand. He cursed once and shook his hand and crawled to the back wall. The back wall had a small window. He had not noticed it before. He pushed at the frame. It opened. He slid out feet first into the cold and dropped into the kitchen garden and lay still in the dirt. He listened. He counted the breaths. The man at the front of the house called his name again. He sounded closer this time. Caleb crawled around the side of the house. He kept the rifle across his forearms. He saw the man at last by the corner of the porch. Tall. Old. A long duster. A revolver in one hand and a lantern in the other. The lantern made him a target. The man did not understand that. Caleb raised the rifle. He did not fire. He said in a calm voice, "Drop the gun." The man flinched. Half-turned. Lifted the revolver. Caleb shot him in the right shoulder. The man dropped the revolver. The man dropped the lantern. The lantern went out in the gravel. The man sat down hard with a sound like a sigh and put his good hand over his bad one and began to swear softly. Caleb stepped out of the dark with the rifle held level. He kicked the revolver away. He squatted next to the man. He said, "Who paid you?" The man said, "The women." "I told you the women." Caleb said, "What is at my barn?" The man said, "Your hired boy. He came up the road yesterday looking for work. They put him in the corn crib. He is still breathing if you hurry." Caleb stood. He walked to the barn. The barn door was not locked. He pushed it open and went in. The hired boy was 16. Caleb had passed him on the road 3 days back and told him there might be work at the ranch. The boy had ridden ahead. The boy had arrived first. The boy was now tied with hay bale wire to the upright of a corn crib, and his left eye was the color of an eggplant, and his bottom lip had been split into 2 pieces. He looked at Caleb, and he tried to say something and could not. Caleb cut him loose. He carried the boy out and set him down on a feed sack and gave him water from a tin dipper. The boy whispered, "3 women." "Mister, 3 women." Caleb said, "I know. I met them." The boy said, "They got a man." "They got 2 men." Caleb said, "One of them is sitting in front of the house holding his shoulder." The boy said, "The other one is at the crossroads." Now here is the thing. Caleb Doon was 61 years old, but he was not stupid and he was not slow. He understood in that moment that the 3 widows were not widows at all. They were a crew. They had been working the deed scam up and down the territory for years. Silas Marwick had probably been their last victim. They had killed him and taken his ranch and were now selling it again, and the cycle would continue until somebody stopped it. Caleb was not going to be the next quiet old man buried under a barn. He stood up. He looked down at the boy. He said, "Son, can you ride?" The boy nodded. Caleb said, "Ride south. Do not stop. 40 miles to the marshal in 3 Forks. Tell him Caleb Doon says come quick. Tell him bring 3 deputies. Tell him it is about the Marwick Ranch." The boy nodded again. He climbed up onto Pardon. Caleb hated to send the boy on his best horse, but his best horse was the one that would make the run. He slapped Pardon on the rump and watched the horse and the boy disappear into the dark. If you are still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. Now back to Caleb at the gate. He turned around. He had a wounded man on his porch. He had a dead lamp on his kitchen floor. He had 3 women coming back at sunrise, with 1 more man he had not yet accounted for. He walked back to the porch. He picked up the wounded man revolver. He checked the cylinder. 5 rounds. He slid it into his belt. He pulled the wounded man up onto the porch and tied his wrists behind the post with the hired boy hay bale wire. He left him there. He went into the house and sat back down at the table. The kerosene smell was strong. The coffee was cold. He drank it anyway. He did not think about sleep. He thought about the crossroads. The boy had said 1 man at the crossroads. That man was now watching for the boy. That man was going to see Pardon go by. That man was going to shoot. Caleb stood up. He took the rifle and the revolver and a coil of rope. He left the lamp dark. He went out the back. He started walking toward the road. The crossroads were 3 miles north. Caleb did not take the road. He walked the brush line. He moved the way an old cattle hand moves when he is cutting around a steer in the dark. Low, slow, patient. The cold did not bother him. The cold he understood. He could feel the 3 folded papers crinkling against his belly with every step, and he thought, those papers are evidence now. Do not lose them. Do not bleed on them. He saw the second man before the second man saw him. The second man was sitting on a flat rock at the crossroads with a Winchester across his knees and a small fire at his feet. The fire was the mistake. Any man who lights a fire when he is supposed to be watching the road has forgotten what watching means. Caleb came up behind him. 6 feet. 3 feet. The man turned his head 1 inch, and Caleb laid the muzzle of the rifle against the back of his ear and said, "Set the Winchester down." "Now." The man set the Winchester down. Caleb said, "Where are the women?" The man said, "In town. Sage Hollow. The boarding house above the feed store." Caleb said, "All three." The man said, "All three." Caleb tied the man's hands with the rope. He pulled him off the rock and laid him on his belly in the dirt next to the fire, and put a knee in his back. He said, "Who is the tall one?" The man said, "Annette." "The wide one is Mary. The young one is Pearl. They are sisters. They are not widows. They have never been widows. Silas Marwick is in pieces under the barn floor at the ranch you just bought. You are number 9. Caleb said, "What is number 9? The man said, "The 9th man they have taken a ranch from. 8 of the others are buried with Silas." Caleb stayed quiet for a long moment. The fire popped. A coal jumped onto the toe of his boot, and he flicked it off without looking. He said, "Where is the boy?" The man said, "I let the boy through. I owed pardon a debt from a remuda I knew 6 years back. I was not going to shoot a horse." Caleb almost laughed. He did not. He stood up. He pulled the man up too. He marched him back down the road toward the ranch. The man walked quiet. The man knew the night was over for him. When they came back to the ranch yard, the wounded man on the porch was still tied to the post, and the wounded man was now also unconscious. Caleb tied the second man to the other post. He walked into the house. He sat down at the table. He poured himself the rest of the coffee. He drank it. He waited. He did not wait long. At first light, the wagon came back up the road. He heard the wheels on the gravel before he saw the wagon. He stayed at the table. He had the rifle across his lap. He had the wounded man revolver in his belt. He had the second man Winchester leaning against the chair. The 3 folded papers were now flat under his coffee cup. The wagon stopped at the fence. He heard the brakes set. He heard 3 pairs of boots crunch across the frozen gravel. The tall one Annette knocked first. 3 knuckles. Then 3 more. He said through the door, "It is open. Step in slow. Hands where I can see them." The latch lifted. The door swung in. They saw him at the table. They saw the rifle. They saw the revolver in his belt. They saw the Winchester. They saw, on the porch behind them when they half turned, the 2 men tied to the posts. The wide one, Mary, let out a small sound. The young one, Pearl, set her hand on the doorframe and steadied herself. The tall one, Annette, did not move at all. Caleb said, "Sit down at the table. All 3 of you. Hands flat on the wood." They sat. They put their hands flat. He said, "I know your names. I know your trade. I know what is under my barn floor. The boy you did not quite kill is 40 miles south by now, and he is bringing the marshal. The marshal will be here by mid-morning. You have a choice. You can sit in this room until he arrives. You can sit on that porch with your men until he arrives. Or you can walk out of this house right now and ride for the Mexican border and never come back. I will give you 10 minutes of head start because I am not a cruel man. But I will tell the marshal everything either way." The tall one, Annette, smiled. The smile was tired. She said, "You would let us go." Caleb said, "I would let you ride. The marshal will decide what letting you ride means." Annette said, "You do not have to do this. We can still settle this between us. You keep the ranch. We keep moving. No one needs to be marched into 3 forks in chains." Caleb said, 8 men are dead. My answer is no. The wide one, Mary, stood up first. She moved fast for a wide woman. Her hand came out of her veil with a derringer in it. Caleb shot her in the leg before the derringer cleared her chin. She went down on the floor. The derringer skidded across the boards. The young one, Pearl, screamed once and dropped to her sister. The tall one, Annette, did not move. She looked at Caleb and she said, "Well played, old man." He said, "Sit back down." She sat back down. The marshal came up the road at 10:30. He had 3 deputies and a wagon and the hired boy riding on the lead horse. The boy was sitting up. The boy was smiling, even with his split lip and his eggplant eye, because Pardon had carried him 40 miles in the dark, and Pardon was now drinking from the well and was going to be fine. The marshal stepped down from his horse. He looked at the 2 men tied to the porch posts. He looked at the 3 women sitting at the kitchen table with their hands flat on the wood. He looked at the small dark spot of blood on the floor near the table. He looked at Caleb Doon sitting in the corner with a rifle across his lap and a coffee cup in his right hand. The marshal said, "Mr. Doon." Caleb said, "Marshal." The marshal said, "The boy told me a story on the ride-up." Caleb said, "Did he?" The marshal said, "I would like to hear your version." Caleb told it. He told it short. He told it without metaphors. He told it the way an old cowboy tells a story, which is to say he left out the parts that did not matter and put the rest down in order. The marshal listened. The deputies listened. The 3 sisters did not look up. When Caleb was done, the marshal nodded once and walked outside and asked one of the deputies to dig at the barn floor. The deputy came back in 20 minutes with a face like wet ash and said, "Yes, sir." "8, sir." "Maybe 9. The marshal put the sisters in the wagon with their men. The wide one, Mary, had a clean bandage on her leg now. The marshal had brought a doctor, too. The doctor rode out with them. The wagon pulled away down the road, and the dust rose behind it, and then settled, and then the road was empty again. The marshal stayed behind. He sat at the table with Caleb. The marshal poured himself a cup of coffee. He drank it. He said, "You will need to come to 3 Forks to give a statement. 3 days from now. I will send a man to escort you." Caleb said, "I will come." The marshal said, "The ranch is yours. Free and clear. The land agent in Sage Hollow is going to spend some time in my jail thinking about his life choices. The forged deed becomes a real one once we file the court order. You do not owe anyone anything." Caleb said, "Thank you." The marshal said, "You saved that boy." Caleb said, "The boy saved himself. He ran." The marshal smiled. He stood. He set his hat back on. He said, "Mr. Doon, you ever need anything in this county, you come find me." Caleb said, "I appreciate that, Marshal." The marshal walked out. He swung up onto his horse. He rode away after the wagon. The dust rose and settled again. Caleb stood in his kitchen alone. The lamp was broken. The window above the table was a square of cold morning sky. The marriage certificates were ash on the floor where he had finally let them burn. He swept the ash out with a broken broom he found in the corner. He boarded up the window with a piece of wood from the porch railing. He fixed the lamp with wire from the corn crib. He took 2 of the boards from the collapsed fence and used them to start a proper repair. By dusk he had not eaten. He had not sat down except to drink water. He had not noticed that the day was gone. When the sun finally dropped behind the ridge, he stood on the porch and looked out at his land. The land did not look any different than it had looked the day before. The land did not care. The land was just land. But the man standing on the porch felt different. The man felt that he had been given a gift he had not earned, and had then been asked to fight for it and had fought. The hired boy stayed. Caleb did not ask him to. The boy just unsaddled Pardon and put him in the barn and slept in the corn crib, and the next morning fixed the broken window without being told. Caleb made breakfast for 2. He did not say anything about wages. The boy did not ask. They ate. They worked. They ate again. By the end of the first week, the fence was up. By the end of the first month, there was a goat. By the end of the first winter, there was a second horse and a second rifle hanging by the door. Caleb Doon lived 11 more years on that ranch. He died in the spring of 1890 in his own bed of a quiet heart that had simply finished its work. The boy, who was no longer a boy by then, buried him by the creek and put a plain wood marker over him. The marker did not say much. It said his name and the years he had lived. It did not say anything about three widows knocking on a door in 1879. It did not need to. That story stayed in the country. The country still tells it. On a winter night when the wind drags itself across that valley and a coyote calls and another coyote answers, an old man cleaning a rifle by lamplight is a man at peace. Caleb Dune earned that peace. He earned it the only way an old cowboy ever earns anything. The hard way. Stay safe out there.